All right, okay, if you are watching, let me know where you're from so that we can see. Who have we got today? Anybody from the UK, like me? Anybody from France, where I am right now? Or maybe even further? Hello from New York City, fantastic. Very good, okay. Somebody from London, excellent, representing the UK. Somebody else from the UK, very good. Ireland, fantastic. Barbados, wow, okay, we're really branching out, brilliant. Somebody else from the UK, Amy from the UK. Hello, Jahira. US, very good. Hello from Belgium, excellent. Okay, all right, I think we are pretty much ready to go. So, a little bit about me. My name is Tabitha. I'm a Tefl teacher and I've been teaching for over a year now. I started in August 2019 and now I'm in France. I moved to France a couple of months ago. It was at the beginning of September. So I've been here for a couple of months. More from Canada, more from South Africa. Very good. Okay. Lots of people rolling in now. Brilliant. So yes, right now I am here in France. We're in the middle of another lockdown. So I am inside the house, staying safe, of course. And currently I'm not working because of the lockdown situation, but I am still employed in a Tefl capacity as a tutor in France, and I've really been enjoying it so far. It's been a very, very good experience. And yeah, that's kind of my brief recap. So let's have a look. Lots of things to talk about today. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover today, of course, the main topic, Tefl during COVID, bit of a tricky subject. Is it possible to Tefl in COVID? Evidently yes, because I'm here and I'm doing it. But of course there are some difficulties, some extra things to bear in mind to protect yourself and to make sure that you're still able to achieve your Tefl goals in the best possible way, in the safest possible way, whilst, being able to still travel and still have a great time. So we're going to be talking lots about COVID, but in more of a practical way, I hope. Finding jobs in Europe generally, and of course finding jobs in Europe during these more difficult times. Some other things like travel restrictions. Can you travel right now? Should you be travelling right now? That's a very important question, which hopefully we can answer. Things like lockdowns, isolation, the kind of effect of that on your job, and also the effect of that on yourself. So those are really important things. And finally, a bit of an update on the current lockdown situation in France, in case there is anyone watching who specifically does want to go to France. But of course, that's relevant to a lot of countries in Europe right now and a lot of countries in the world generally. So plenty to talk about. For the new people that have joined, my name's Tabitha. I am a Tefl teacher. I've been Tefling for over a year. I started back in August 2019, got my Tefl qualification with I2I, of course, had a fantastic experience. Very quickly was able to secure my first teaching contract, which was in China, in a city called Fuzhou. Fuzhou is about halfway between Shanghai, just here, and Hong Kong at the bottom. So very hot, tropical, fantastic experience. I was in Fuzhou for what was meant to be 1 year and ended up being 6 months because of COVID. So initially, I got my qualification. I actually did it in a sort of evening class way. So I did the distance learning approach, which I found really, really useful, very beneficial. It fit around my job at the time because I used to work in London and I was an account manager. But because I was kind of looking to retrain, start something new, that was the perfect solution for me, was to do something distance-based. So that's how I found I2I. I completed my training within a couple of months. I did my final exams, got all of my feedback, got my certificate, and then I started to interview. So at first I really didn't know where to go. I was a bit of an open book. I love Europe, and I knew that eventually I would probably want to be in potentially France or maybe even Italy, but really I wasn't sure. And the more that I looked into it, the more that I found that teaching jobs in China are a really fantastic way to kind of get your base in teaching. So if you were in my position and you've got your TEFL qualification, you want to get out there and teach, from my personal experience, I would hugely recommend the China route, kind of teaching in China first, and then there's the options to teach in so many countries, pretty much every country in the world really. But I do think that because of the very competitive kind of start salaries, lots of benefits, things like free apartments. Obviously, you can live in some fantastic cities or even in some very rural places in China. It's just a brilliant way to start. So that's how I ended up kind of finding Fuzhou and going to Fuzhou. So I taught at a school called York English for the past year. 6 months of that was in Fuzhou, in person. It was brilliant. I did lots of travel. I was able to go to Shanghai and Wishan and Hong Kong and Xiamen, and it was brilliant. And then unfortunately, we all know how the story goes. COVID hit and China went into its national lockdown, and back at the time, really nobody knew what was going to happen. So I decided to leave. Not to leave my contract, just to leave my apartment and go to the UK. And that's where I stayed. I ended up seeing out the rest of my contract in China. Rest of my contract with my Chinese company in the UK through distance learning. So that was a big leap, a big adjustment. But luckily I was still able to keep my regular classes and to finish my contract. So that's kind of how I ended up in a situation in September where I couldn't return to China, and I was pretty desperate to go back, but it wasn't a possibility, unfortunately. And that's how I ended up looking to Europe and seeing, was it possible? Was it sensible? Could I realistically move to Europe to TEFL during COVID-19? So here we are. That's a little bit about me. If anyone has any questions about that, I know it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of just one person's route into teaching, but please leave a comment. I can see more people joining, more people watching. If you want to know anything specific, I will try and answer. And also, there's the I2I team that are able to answer your questions as well. So keep questions coming in. If it's anything about my experience, how I found my job in China, that kind of thing, just let me know. And I think without further ado, we should probably move on to the differences between China and France. Obviously, it goes without saying there are some fairly large differences between teaching in those two countries. So to give you a little bit of flavour, an idea of what my daily schedule was like in China, I will try to paint a picture. So I essentially I had a 2-week training period with my school. That's separate to your TEFL training. It's not the same thing. Once you've got your TEFL training, you are effectively qualified to teach English. But you'll find that a lot of schools, and in my opinion, the better schools, will want to have a little bit of a kind of additional training period of maybe 2 weeks to train you in their way of doing things. So that's what I was doing for the first 2 weeks when I arrived in China. Obviously, very big culture shock. And so that 2 weeks is also, it's really good for adjusting. I can see some questions coming in about my position in France, where I'm based. So I'm based in Lyon at the moment, and I'm going to be talking next all about how I ended up getting my position. And kind of, I'll summarise the China situation because I know it's a very popular route right now for a lot of people. A lot of people want to go to China, and obviously I'm a big supporter of that. So that's basically my my experience. I did my initial training, and then that was it. I got some regular classes. So as a teacher in China, you will probably, depending on your school, you'll be assigned regular classes. I taught between the ages of 4 and 14. So I had some really young children. I had some children with excellent levels of English. And I had some children who couldn't speak English at all. And their first experience of English and of an English teacher was with me. So it was really a big mix. You start from, you could open a class where there is 0% English. And my school was a immersive language. They kind of believed in immersion for learning the language, which I think nowadays you'll find a lot of schools are. So I am speaking 100% English with a class that speaks 0% English. So it's a kind of amazing challenge that initially in your training you think there is no way that I'm ever going to be able to do that, but it's 100% possible. So I can see, did you have challenges outside the classroom with language? Did many people speak English there? So where I was in Fuzhou, a lot of people did not speak English. There was a very limited amount of English. And I remember before I went, a lot of people were quite apprehensive, especially my family and friends were saying, that's great, but you can't speak Chinese. Are you sure you want to do that? Yes, in some ways it's a bit of a struggle if you can't speak the language of the place that you are. My biggest advice would obviously be to try and get yourself signed up to some sort of language school or language class while you're there. It's absolutely possible. I learned a fair bit of Mandarin while I was in China. Right now I've taken a bit of a pause because I'm now trying to focus on French. But you can learn quite quickly. You'll find that within your school, there will be people, of course, who can speak English. And depending on where you are in China, even if you can't speak Chinese, you'll find that there are many expat groups, many expat communities who do speak English and who want to make friends. So yes, it's a bit difficult when you don't speak Chinese, particularly when you first move, combined with the culture shock. But no, it is absolutely not the be-all and end-all of deciding whether or not to go, in my opinion. And it's absolutely possible to learn kind of functioning Chinese to get you through the day, even if you can't necessarily read or write, or, if your goal isn't fluency, you can still learn enough to get by. So, that was kind of my daily life. I had regular classes, different age groups, different levels of English. I went to the same campus every day in Fuzhou. I worked with the same co-teachers who were all fantastic. My supervisors were able to give me regular training. You'll find that, I imagine, in almost every school that you would Tefl at, there would be a supervisor who is responsible for kind of your ongoing training, giving you more feedback and kind of helping you along in your road to being a good teacher. So training never stops with your Tefl. It continues with every single teaching role that you go into. A good teacher never stops learning. Cliche, but true. So that was China. When I had to return to the UK, obviously classes moved online. Perfect timing. Somebody's just asked, how was your experience of online teaching? Would you recommend it? So I never set out to be an online teacher. I think that's... I want to be totally honest about that. I set out to teach classes in person. I saw myself being a teacher who was kind of like up and moving around the classroom and getting everyone involved that way. So absolutely, it's fair to be apprehensive about the move to online teaching. But no, in general, I would really recommend it. And as somebody who's currently learning French and their classes have been moved online, it does work. Even that immersion method, even just speaking fully in the language that you're trying to learn or trying to teach, it does still work, in my opinion. And actually, it's kind of a great exercise in creativity, because you may think like, how am I going to make online teaching interesting? Is it just going to be me talking to a computer and no one really kind of taking anything in? Absolutely not. I frequently found myself running around the room, picking up various bits of realia and stuff that I could use to like show what I was talking about. So yes, I would recommend online teaching. There are plenty of places that you can find roles online, including I2I's sister website, Love Tefl. You can find loads of online teaching roles at the moment, very flexible. It entirely depends on your situation. Maybe you can teach more hours in less sociable times, let's say, if you want to be making the most of that China-UK time difference. Or maybe you just have a very limited amount of hours and you just want to try and build up a few classes in that time. All sorts of teaching jobs, teaching online jobs can cater for that. So yes, I would recommend it. Yes, there are loads of places that you can teach online. So that's basically the situation up until September. From the start of my training journey in in April of 2019, that's when I got my I2I certificate. Left for China in August 2019, finished my first year contract in September 2020. So that is how we ended up in France. Before I move on to France and to kind of why I decided to teach abroad during a pandemic, questions? Does anyone want to know anything about China, daily life, best things, worst things, tricky things? Yeah, I would love to know. Or if anyone themselves has taught in China, that would be really interesting as well. I've seen someone say, are you level 5 in Tefl? I can't remember the levels. I am 120 hours. That was my Tefl certificate that I got from I2I. In China, you'll find that there are lots of positions with 120 hours being a kind of minimum. There are plenty of other jobs that require you to have higher levels to start with. There are also some jobs that allow you to get your Tefl at the same time as teaching. So it really depends. Anything else? Any other China related questions or Fuzhou related questions? No, perfect. Okay. All right, so moving on. Teaching in Europe during a pandemic. It sounds sort of funny to say it out loud, doesn't it? I think this year is, I don't need to say how crazy this year has ended up being. It's really thrown a spanner in the works for a lot of people. But I've just seen, are you legally required to have a degree to teach in China? Yes, you are legally required to have a degree to teach in China. It is a fairly new it's a fairly new requirement. Before you didn't have to necessarily have a degree, but nowadays you do. I hope that helps. The time difference, did it affect you much? Moving to China, no, I was jet lagged for about 2 weeks and then I was absolutely fine. Teaching online, I couldn't choose my hours because I was still obliged to follow the classes that I'd had in China. So the time difference was quite difficult at times. But it's not something that you necessarily need to be concerned about if you're coming into this from scratch, because you can ultimately find a job that suits you. For me, I kind of fell into working night shifts rather than choosing to do them. But it absolutely wasn't impossible. You adjust, you sleep in the day, you go to bed early. Sometimes I went to bed at 8 p.m. and got up at 2 a.m. Sometimes all the time. that was my life for the last few months. But it could be tough when I was teaching online, but it was worth it. And actually, even when you're absolutely shattered and you roll out of bed and you're like, oh God, now I've got my 5-year-old class. But they're so funny and they're so, they're infectious. Their enthusiasm is infectious, and you can't, you get into it, you wake up, and ultimately, if you're passionate about teaching, you're not massively fazed by things like that. There are always going to be days where, even in person, you're a bit tired or a bit, thinking about things, but when you walk into the classroom, you get into it. Okay, great. More links from eye to eye. That's fantastic. Good stuff. Okay. So France. Yes, I found myself in a position where I wasn't exactly sure what to do, because I wanted to go back to China, and my original plan was to stay in China for a few more years. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the culture, the benefits, the amount of money that I was saving. I could sing the praises of working in China all day. And actually, I do have a blog post on that. My blog is whereistab.wordpress.com. If you want to read that, I've talked all about my favourite things about teaching in China. So yes, I could sing the praises of China all day, but I couldn't get back to China, and I was left thinking, what exactly do I do now? I spoke a bit of French. I did French kind of up to A-level, so my French wasn't too bad, and I thought, I love the country, but is it possible? I honestly don't know if it's possible to teach in France. So I started looking into it, and I would say first and foremost, it is competitive to teach in France as a kind of formal classroom, set classes. It is quite competitive to be a Tefl teacher in France. However, there are many routes to teaching or doing teaching adjacent jobs in France that you can definitely apply for and be eligible for. So that's what I started looking into. Generally speaking, in France, you'll find that employers prefer it if you have several years teaching experience, which is why often you'll find people go to Asia and do a few years of their kind of early years of becoming a teacher in China or in Japan or Thailand, many countries, because often, as I spoke about earlier, there's very good training in these countries, lots of benefits, loads of kind of great things that you can do and experience. So I was one of those people that was planning on doing my first few years in China and then potentially either moving in a different direction in China, maybe adults or maybe university students or something like that, or trying my hand at then moving to Europe. But because I only had 1 year's teaching experience, I had to be a bit open-minded and a bit flexible about what I could realistically do in France. So there are loads of things that you can do in France that you can apply for. I'm going to run through them, and I'm going to say my favourites, possible advantages and disadvantages of these jobs, and let me know, as I'm talking about them, let me know whether you would consider jobs like these, whether you think they are something you could do, because you'll find that teaching is an amazing, very multifaceted discipline where everyone has secret talents that kind of come out, and you find out that they can apply to other areas as well. So first and foremost, nannies and au pairs. You might not think of this as a traditional teaching job, and it is not necessary to have a Tefl background to do nannying or au pairing. Often people just go straight away and they go into it from that. But I would say a huge advantage if you've done your Tefl training, particularly if you've done, like me, an online course, but you don't have the practical element yet. It's a really fantastic way of then getting your practical experience and really boosting your chances with other employers. So don't necessarily disregard nannying or au pairing jobs. It's also a very affordable way to do it, because often, as many people that I speak to find, France is very expensive compared to China, for example. If you're used to living in your wonderful paid-for apartment in China by your school, obviously then you come to France and housing's more expensive, the cost of living's more expensive. So if you are a nanny or an au pair, you usually live with the family, so that's a fantastic thing for kind of making it a more affordable option, or an option that's available to more people. You don't necessarily need to be put off by the thought of, oh God, how am I going to afford rent in Paris? Well, you don't necessarily need to. That might be something that's built into your contract. So nannying, au pairing, great way to get practical experience, also a really good way to affordably live in France. Similarly to that, and this is the job that I do currently, so obviously I'm quite passionate about it, tutoring. So I would put tutoring in two categories of academic tutoring and kind of tutoring around skills. So academic tutoring could be any age, from children through to university students through to adults who need one-on-one or small group tutoring around maybe specific grammar points. They might be preparing for exams like in France, when you're learning French, you do the DELF. There are other exams often that people are trying to prepare for. So that's a fantastic thing you can do. You can do that either privately. You can go to France, or go to whatever country in Europe is your dream, and you can start to build clients and build a base, get more people that way. There are risks surrounding that. Obviously, it's quite difficult to initially get clients and to build up a reputation, but the benefits is so many benefits. You set your own hours. You can choose what you cover. You can teach a very wide range of things. You might have somebody who is they're preparing for a university exam, and you find yourself specifically focusing on that, and that's going to give you a fantastic base in things like grammar. Your grammar is going to be really on point after doing a lot of drilling of that with one of your students. Or you could find that you're tutoring children, like I do now, in which case you teach a really wide range of things in a very diverse way. You are doing songs, you're doing dances, you're doing crafts. It's really varied, so that's a huge benefit. Or maybe you'll find that you're teaching adults. Adults learn English for all sorts of reasons, not just business English, but also people who potentially English isn't their first language. They've moved to the country and they want to improve their chances. So there's all sorts of reasons why people might need tutoring, and there are plenty of ways to get into tutoring privately and through an agency. I personally am currently a tutor for a company called Babylon. Babylon is a French company. They originally were based in Paris, but they've expanded and they teach in lots of cities, including Lyon, which is where I am now. I work with several families, so I work with 3 different families, and I'm responsible for kind of managing my hours, managing my admin, but I essentially deliver their pedagogy and their syllabus to the children I'm working with. The children I work with are between 3 and 6, so they're quite young. I do have some experience with that already, because obviously when I was in China, I taught those young levels. But it's, again, very different to be teaching in a one-to-one environment, and it's really interesting, actually, to see those massive differences between when you're a teacher in a classroom and when you are going to someone's home and teaching their children kind of that daily useful English. So that's the company I'm with, Babylon. I'm sure that I can leave that underneath. But plenty of agencies in France, really, that you can tutor for, and of course, like I mentioned, you can obviously be a private tutor and kind of go about it that way. So they are, in my opinion, some of the alternative teaching jobs. I haven't mentioned activities coach, which is another way that you can apply English to what you're doing. You might not be, first and foremost, an English tutor in terms of grammar or in terms of vocab, but if somebody wants to learn in English, you could find yourself being a dance tutor who teaches exclusively in English, or you could find yourself teaching music in English in a tutoring or activities coach kind of capacity. So again, even more things that you may not have necessarily thought about that are routes into France that aren't insanely competitive or unrealistic. Very realistic, very possible. If you do want to be a formal teacher in France, again, I'm not trying to suggest that this is impossible. Of course, loads of people do that all the time. it would be strongly preferable if you had a few years teaching experience. So for somebody at the start of their Tefl journey who's just getting qualified, it might be quite tricky, but maybe you've got a secret like master's in your back pocket or something that sets you apart. You can still apply for those roles, look into it, see what's out there, see what you need. But with all of these things, Tefl is absolutely the best way to start, to just get your foot on the ladder, have that confidence in your ability to teach English as a foreign language because you've had the training, you know how to do it, and now you can go and you can tutor, or you can be an activities coach, or you can start your teacher training, or various other things, nannying, au pairing. That's exactly it. So that's why for me, I think although some of those earlier jobs like nannying and au pairing, you don't necessarily need your TEFL before you go, I would strongly recommend it. It's if you want to teach in the long term, it's a fantastic investment into getting the theory and then getting the practical. So absolutely, it works. So those are some of the jobs, some of the advantages and disadvantages that I would say are attached to those jobs that you can do in France. In terms of demand for TEFL teachers in Europe, like I said, it's competitive. Lots of people want to teach in Europe. It doesn't mean it's impossible. You absolutely can get teaching jobs in Europe. But like I said, getting that kind of experience really gives your CV a bit of an upward trajectory. The more experience that you have, the more practical experience, the more ways that you've shown your passion for TEFL and for teaching English, the more likely it is that you can build yourself a really fantastic case for employing you, basically. Somebody said, cost of living in France versus income. Very good point. So right now, I live in a student studio, which costs €600 a month. For me, coming from London, I know the other people that are from London in this chat, that's quite reasonable. But yes, it is expensive. Being in Europe, rent in Europe is much more expensive. Living costs in general, food isn't necessarily that cheap. So my income currently is definitely not as I don't have as much left over at the end of the month as I did in China. And right now I'm not saving a lot of money, but it's a question of your personal priorities and your personal desire to teach in Europe or teach abroad. It kind of depends on your situation. For me, because I've been teaching in China for a year and I saved a lot of money, this became a viable option. You might not necessarily have the funds immediately to move abroad to Europe, which is quite expensive, and just get going. I'm not suggesting that everyone's in that position. And I wasn't either. But yes, in general, salaries for a teacher, absolutely, no problem, very good. In Europe, it depends, of course, in the country. It even depends on the city as well. You'll find different cities have different weightings. For things like nannying and au pairing and tutoring, you'll find that your salary is lower than that of a traditional teacher. If that's something that you can afford to do, then yes, great thing to do. If it's something that you think it's not for me, there are other ways that you can go about it. You could even move to France and supplement your income with online teaching. So there are ways of getting around it. It all kind of depends. Somebody says, I'm looking into moving to France in December and I want TEFL, but more on the side because I'm going to university. How much do you get paid for tutoring? Okay, so right now I get paid €10 an hour at Babylon. €1 of that is your congé pay, which is your holiday pay in France. So again, it depends on how many hours you end up getting. Maybe you would want to think about supplementing your income with online teaching or private tutoring or activities coaching. Lots of ways you could do that, but it's definitely compatible with university because I'm studying French at the moment at a language school and it works really well for me. So hopefully that helps. Which company did you go through when you went to China? I taught at a school called York English and I applied directly. I found it on the Love TEFL website which I found incredibly useful once I'd completed my training. There are a great many job boards for Tefl jobs, and not all of them are watertight when it comes to scams, but I found my experience with the Love Tefl website was really good, very transparent, lots of real jobs. You didn't have to go sifting through tens of thousands of scam postings, so that was really nice. So yes, the name of my school was York English. They also have vacancies right now, so I'm sure I can leave the link. Do you need a degree to teach in France, and do you have a teaching related degree? I don't know, I assume yes, but I'm not sure if you need a degree to teach in France, and I'm also not sure if it has to be a teaching related degree. For example, in the UK, if you want to be a teacher, you usually have to do your PGCE. So I'm not sure, but for me, no, my degree was in English and American literature. So English related, but not really from a teaching side. I just love English, so that was my degree. And then my TEFL was what really taught me everything I needed to know about actually getting out there. Somebody said, I hold a certificate on sign language. Is that an advantage? I mean, in my personal opinion, definitely. That's fantastic. I think that's brilliant. I don't know if you're referring to BSL, ASL. Either way, I think, yeah, absolutely. More and more teaching jobs nowadays, it's a fantastic advantage if you can show that your ability to teach children is not just limited to one certain type of children. It's, something that all children can benefit from. So yeah, I would say definitely. Let's see. Okay, one really important thing that I did want to talk about, obviously the title of this is moving abroad during COVID. So specifically, I think it's important to touch on ensuring that your job is secure at this time. There are lots of ways of going about this. For me, I checked with my employer what their kind of lockdown contingency plan was. So I needed to make sure that obviously things like my rent and my health insurance were all in check. But when it comes to my job, I wanted to check with my employer, what are you going to do if we have to go into a second lockdown, which obviously now we are in a second lockdown. So I asked them, and I found some of these questions were really useful to ask. So things like furlough schemes, it's called something else in French, but for anyone watching who understands, a furlough scheme is when you get paid either 80 to 100% of your usual salary. The government may pay that, your employer may pay that, it varies country to country, but it is essentially when you get paid despite not being able to work because of a lockdown or because of coronavirus. So I asked my current employer, what happens if we go into a second lockdown, or if we go into lockdown, do we all have to leave the country? What's going on there? So that was really useful to know. Things like, am I eligible as a foreigner for a furlough scheme? How much is the furlough? And then you can factor that into your backup plan of how much money you need and how much money you can live on. Flexible housing, for me, because I'm in France for an extended period of time, I have a studio that I let out privately, but if your housing is, for example, if you're an au pair and you're staying with a family, you might need to ask them, check with them, what happens if we go into another lockdown? Obviously then you are 24/7 with a family that's not your own, so it's good to know what their expectations would be in terms of you looking after the children, your contribution to the house, things like that might change. So that's probably a good thing to ask. Jobs which offer medical insurance or routes to medical insurance. So for me, my job doesn't offer medical insurance like my job did in China. But because I pay into the kind of social security scheme through my taxes, I am eligible eventually to get medical insurance. There's something called the carte vitale in France, which is essentially means that you can receive medical care like a local. So that's something to check as well. But I would really stress, country to country and employer to employer, asking those questions is really important right now. Things can change at the drop of the hat, and they do. So ask the question, am I going to need to do X, Y, and Z if X, Y, and Z happens? Okay, so travel restrictions, on a related note, more COVID-y stuff, but definitely worth talking about. So my experience, I didn't have to quarantine when I originally moved to France. This was back in September. Back then it was I hesitate to say this, but a relatively stable period in terms of the virus, when cases were in the low thousands. Obviously not great, but cases were in the low thousands, and it wasn't necessary to quarantine moving country to country. So I did not have to quarantine, but if you want to move abroad during this time, my number one piece of advice, check the government website all the time. Check it. You need to know. The onus is ultimately on you to make sure that you know the country's rules regarding quarantine, regarding when you enter a country, and also when you're leaving a country. I've just seen somebody say, do you anticipate any changes after Brexit? So that's a really good question. And another thing that's really worth considering if you are wanting to move to Europe. There's a lot of uncertainty with Brexit, that goes without saying. My understanding is that if you move to Europe, or I'm going to say France, because this, obviously for me, I can only really speak about France. But because I moved to France before Brexit came into effect, 31st of December this year, I am automatically eligible to stay for 6 months, as far as I'm aware. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure because I moved here before Brexit came into effect, I can stay. There's a grace period for getting your documents in order and applying for things like your visa, blah, 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 blah. You might need a social security card and things like that. So for me, yes, Brexit has affected me a little, but not necessarily. It's not the end of the road if you want to teach abroad. I've just seen that I2I have they've got a blog post about the potential kind of impacts of Brexit on teaching in Europe, so I would definitely check that out if you want more specific information. But for me personally, I'm benefiting from a kind of grace period, I guess, where I can get my paperwork in order and get everything sorted. So anyway, did I have to isolate again? No, I didn't have to isolate when I got here in September. Although when I came back from China in February, I did self-isolate. So self-isolation, much like quarantine, it's something that you just have to be aware of at the moment. Obviously everyone is anyway. When you're moving from country to country, it's really important to know the requirements of the countries that you're going to and living in. So what else we got? Are people allowed to move abroad right now? It's a good question. Are people even allowed? My understanding is yes, if you are moving for work. So obviously everybody watching this is interested in Tefl. If you are moving abroad for work, my understanding is that yes, you can move abroad at the moment. Bearing in mind that you will have to follow all of the countries' rules and regulations surrounding COVID. For example, masks are now obligatory kind of across Europe. I'm trying to think if there's anything specific in France. Okay, so for example, right now, during this lockdown, you need to fill in an attestation, which is like a little form that basically says the purpose of why you're leaving the house. So you're going to get food or you're going for your daily exercise. That's not something that exists in the UK. So it's small things like that that you need to be aware of between country to country. I originally planned to talk a little bit about travel corridors, but I think the situation with travel corridors has changed quite a lot. So originally when the travel corridors were set up, and actually when I was moving, this was still in place, there was a list of destinations, and still is, a list of destinations that are considered not to have an exceptionally large risk to travellers, that you are able to travel to and then when you come back to the UK, you don't necessarily have to quarantine. But I would say, again, I know I'm really hammering the point home here, but check the guidelines of the country that you're going to, because, for example, Germany, I think, as far as I'm aware, is still on this travel corridor list right now, which means that if you're coming back from Germany, I don't think you have to quarantine if it's on the list and blah, blah, blah. Check the website. But if you go to Germany, despite not having to quarantine coming back, you still have to quarantine in Germany. So please check. It's really important. You may have to do something like let the local authorities know that you are new in the area, things like that. So travel corridors, yes, it's kind of interesting from a perspective of which countries have a lower threat level right now, but it's not necessarily that applicable for moving abroad long term, because ultimately, if you're moving abroad, it doesn't really matter if you have to quarantine when you go back to the UK, because that's not the purpose of your trip. The trip is that you're leaving. So So yes, providing that you are relocating for work, you are adequately prepared, you have your health insurance, you follow all the local guidelines, yes, in theory, you can still move to Europe. I'm here. Despite being in lockdown, I'm still very, very glad that I did it. It's been fantastic so far. So it absolutely can be done. And I think originally, and particularly during the first lockdown, it would have probably seemed not unrealistic, but I think people would have had more apprehension about relocating, moving abroad during this pandemic. But unfortunately, it's something that is persisting, and it doesn't mean that your life has to stop completely. As long as you are following all of the rules and you're acting responsibly, ultimately you'll either be doing that in your home country or in the country in which you intend to move. But in the meantime, you could be furthering yourself on your Tefl journey. So that was my kind of reason eventually for wanting to go abroad. Despite all of this, I still wanted to go. So one last thing that I wanted to mention on travel and guidelines, there is a website called Reopen EU, which I can leave below. It's really useful. It's essentially an interactive map which sets out detailed travel advice, restrictions, guidelines, threat level, use of apps like Test and Trace for different countries across Europe. Really, really useful. Yes, great thing to look at if you are totally unsure of where you want to go, and that could be a really useful way of making your decision. So yeah, does anybody have any questions on travel, moving abroad during a pandemic? That section I feel is there's the potential for a lot of questions there, so I am waiting with bated breath to see what people want to know. I certainly had a lot of questions. Had to do a lot of research when I was considering this move to France originally, partly because I wasn't sure about the practicalities of teaching in France, but obviously partly because there are many extra things to bear in mind at the moment. Thank you for all your help. No problem, thank you, Kristen. Do employers help with visas? It totally depends. So I right now have a CDI contract, which is it's the best contract to have for somebody in my position who is kind of month to month effectively. It's not a year-long contract. You sign up for an agreed amount of time. So originally with Babylon, I was planning to do 3 months with kind of scope to continue. So yeah, they didn't like help with visas in terms of like, I didn't need a visa because right now I'm still part of the EU, so I don't need visas. But next year, I really don't know. It's going to depend on your specific employer, the cost of the visa. A lot of the finer details of Brexit are yet to be worked out. There could yet there could yet be some sort of agreement in terms of travelling and working abroad. So check with your employer. In China, yes, my visa was totally covered. Everything was reimbursed. And I would say if you're looking to move to China, definitely look out for employers that cover your visa. But in Europe, it depends. It really depends on the type of work that you're doing. If it's a full-time permanent contract, yes, I would think that there was some scope to support you. But if you're a part-time tutor or you're doing part-time work, I don't know about the kind of feasibility of getting like a full visa scholarship, but worth talking about with your employer. Right, let me see some more questions. Are the French strict with masks and sanitising going to the shops? I mean, as strict as I've seen in the UK, yes. So in theory, masks are absolutely obligatory in France in public. I also wear them when I go to my French school. So yes, they do. They wash their hands, they sanitise, they wear masks. There will always be people who flout the rules, unfortunately, but there are huge fines in place and things like that. Let's have another look. In France, do you teach online only or also in the class? If class, is it in public school or private school? So for me personally, I'm not teaching online at the moment, although I think it's something I'm going to look into in 2021. I'm a tutor. So for me right now, that means going to people's homes. So I'm not teaching in a school. I'm not teaching in a classroom. I'm going to people's homes and tutoring there. So hopefully that answers your question. What else have we got? Yes, as I2I pointed out, most countries have shut their borders at the moment. So everything we're talking about, all of this is subject to change. Now that we're in a second lockdown for many countries, including France, it may not be feasible to move literally during a lockdown, but over the course of the pandemic, yes, there will be moments where it is possible to relocate for work. Odd question, does South Korea offer similar China benefits? Interested in going there? Great question, not an odd question. Yes, there are some really good benefits of working in South Korea. I have a few friends that did work in China and now work in South Korea, and they love it. It's a very different experience. I'd be really hesitant to draw lots of parallels between them. I think culturally they are very, very different countries. But benefit-wise, yes, lots of similar benefits. Things like paid for apartments, obviously medical insurance, things like that are standard, are included. So yeah, lots of similarities. I would say the cost of living's quite different. It depends where you are. Obviously, if you're in Shanghai and Seoul, like there may not be a huge difference. But if you're in Guilin or Fuzhou or a kind of lesser city, more of a rural city, the cost of living is unbelievably low. So I think you'd be hard pressed to beat that in South Korea. But again, if you're in a more rural area, it is likely that your money will stretch further. But yes, good question. Right, let's do one more question. Has lockdown taken a toll on you? Do you get to talk to roommates or something? Very good question. That is actually our kind of final talking point today, is about lockdown. So the current situation in France, we had an update last night actually from the health minister in France. Everything is staying fully locked down for the next 15 days minimum while they try to get a handle on this second wave, which has really taken a toll in France. The numbers are climbing quite dramatically, unfortunately. Lockdown does take its toll. I think it's really important at the moment to not only have some flexibility, but also if you're somebody who knows that you struggle with being alone or that you struggle being in a small space, it would be useful to try and have some kind of backup plan. So for example, me and some friends in Lyon, we decided to rent a place and stay in the countryside for lockdown, because we were more nervous about being in a city, and also the fact that you're in a studio apartment, that can be quite tough. So yes, I would I couldn't claim that lockdown doesn't take a toll. It's been really tough on everyone and is really tough on everyone, regardless of the country you're in. But thank God for technology, right? We can all ring our families and ring our friends and talk to them. So yeah, it's tough, but it's not impossible. And now that we've done lockdown 1, I mean, I wouldn't like to say like, oh, we're used to it now, but I think we're more mentally prepared than we were before. I definitely learned a lot of lessons from lockdown 1 that I'm kind of taking into this second lockdown. Trying to use my daily exercise to get out of the house, get some fresh air, things like that. And yes, keep talking to people, keep your support network close by. It's very important. I did see a question about talking to other teachers in France. So because I'm not a teacher, I'm not a traditional teacher in the sense of working in a school right now. I'm a tutor. I don't have a lot of contact with other tutors in Lyon, but I think that's specifically more to do with my employer. So if I'd been based in Paris, for example, where Babylon is founded, I think I'd probably have more opportunity to connect with other tutors. But for me, it hasn't been a make or break thing. It's been more, there are plenty of people that you can connect with virtually if you want to talk about teaching things. And I've made friends with a couple of French teachers in France as well, so you can still talk about teaching, your general teaching experiences, even though they're not Tefl teachers or English teachers necessarily, because obviously we forget that people teach Spanish abroad and teach French abroad and all sorts of things like that. So yes, I have managed to make some teaching connections in France, but the majority of people that I spend my time with are French students like me. So yeah. As to with lockdown abroad, how you've coped with lockdown. I think we've covered that in some detail, how we've kind of coped with lockdown. It's a mixture of drinking lots of nice French wine, talking to each other, looking after our mental health, going for nice walks, and waiting for some good news. That's my strategy. Can you compare your social life in China with France? Was it more difficult in China? Absolutely not. Absolutely not more difficult in China. Even in a small city like Fuzhou, there was ample opportunity to meet loads of other teachers. It was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed my time in China. Fuzhou has a very small expat community, but in a way, it's really nice because the connections that you forge with teachers are very strong. You go through this huge culture shock together. You often find that the teachers that have been there longer are willing to kind of take the new teachers under their wing, which is very much what happened to me. Shout out to everybody in China that looked after me when I first arrived, because I was definitely very scared and very nervous and worried about what it was going to be like. So no, 100% very easy to have a fantastic social life in China. There are loads of expats. Chinese people are so friendly. Obviously not all Chinese people, but I would say as a rule, I felt very welcome in China by the Chinese people that I met. I felt very like my presence teaching in China was a welcome presence. I didn't feel like a unwanted stranger. I was very much kind of brought into the culture and everything like that. So yeah, let me see. I think I saw another question coming through about no problem, Francesca. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Is my language school teaching online or in person right now? Neither right now, because I do tutoring with very low levels. I am not able to work at the moment. If I was still in Lyon, because this second lockdown has slightly different rules to the first, if your work can be considered childcare, and childcare is under the bracket of what Babylong do, it is possible to continue your work. But because what I do is is more based around games and activities that promote English use, and also because I decided to leave Lyon during the course of this second lockdown, I have just not worked this month. So that's why I was saying it's kind of so important to have a bit of a backup plan, financially, but also with your employer, so that if this happens, you're both on the same page. So not working at the moment, but gives me time to do webinars like this, which is great. See if we've got any others. How did I find my current job in France? I found my current job in France through just Google searches. I actually found Babylon over a year ago. Back when I was first starting my Tefl journey, I found them and kind of had it in the back of my mind in case I ever found myself wanting to move to France as a kind of way to top up, or I wouldn't say it's necessarily a full salary. It depends on the amount of hours you do. For me, it's not a full salary, but it's definitely a really good way to keep your foot in the Tefl game and kind of stay up to date, continue refining all of your teaching skills in a bit of a different context. So that's how I found my job, was just through Googling. We've got the Babylon link. Is the school that you're going to learn French in person or online? It's been online for the last few weeks, because there isn't an obligation for French schools to shut during this second lockdown. France's attitude to this second lockdown has been very much to prioritise keeping educational institutions open where possible. But my school decided to move online, because there's a lot of international students, a lot of students returned home to their home countries. So I think they were keen to kind of make sure that everyone had the same chance to learn. But it's possible they could be reopening soon, because they are not obliged to close during this second lockdown. All right, let me just check if I've missed anything really important in these questions. Company recommendations. I do recommend Babylon. I think that they have a really interesting pedagogy and their teaching materials are very good. I've had a good experience with them so far. They've been easy to communicate with, and yeah, all good. Definitely recommend them. But I haven't been here for years, so I don't have other companies that I can recommend, unfortunately. But of course, you can always teach online. More people doing the level 5 course, which is fantastic. You're going to have a really good base in your Tefl. Any tips for China about things to watch for in setting up a contract? That is a very good question. Yes, so I do have some tips. Things like medical insurance would be great. Your apartment being included, that's really good. Finding out if you have to work overtime and what your overtime rate is. Your school's regular hours. It's always really important to look for your teaching hours compared to your planning hours. So some China contracts seem to have insanely good benefits with huge salaries, but it's because you're working all the time. Like you're delivering lessons for every hour that is on your contract. But the reality of teaching is that you need time to plan. So ideally look for contracts which have a paid planning component. That would be a big recommendation for me. Also, my personal employer, York English, they were really good at helping you along with the process of moving to China. So I was accompanied when I went to my medical, when I had to set up my bank account, my phone. They were able to help me with setting up apps like Didi and Taobao on my phone and things like that. So good admin support is also another. It's very much like an additional benefit. I wouldn't say it's a make or break, but it's a great thing. If you see that in potential contracts, definitely a good thing. Right, okay, I think we are going to wrap up and summarise what we've talked about today. So, my top tips for applying for Tefl jobs during COVID specifically, they're a little bit different to maybe some of the Tefl tips that you've heard before. So I would say number one, flexibility, open-mindedness, preparedness, and enthusiasm. They're all together because I think that they all help each other. So things like your flexibility to being in your new country, you need to be aware that things could change, your situation could change, you could very much end up going into lockdown or not being able to work for a month or two. So flexibility and open-mindedness, important. I say open-mindedness as well because I think particularly when you're looking for jobs in Europe, like we spoke about earlier, it's really good if you can be open-minded about the type of work you would consider. So if you go in thinking, I'm only going to work in a private school in the centre of Paris with these hours, great that you know what you want, but I think you are potentially, really limiting the scope of what you could achieve with your Tefl, especially if you're at the start of your training. I think it's so important to be open about the types of work that could benefit you. Don't look down on things like au pairing. Au pairing is a really fantastic way of getting practical teaching experience in a very hands-on context, and employers look at it with high regard. So things like that is, it's great. And also camp activities, coordinators and things like that, all of that, really, really good. And very much something you can use your Tefl with. Preparedness, enthusiasm, again, the same as I said before, be prepared for the things that may go wrong or may change during your time abroad at the moment. If you move abroad during a pandemic, you need to be prepared for the fact that you may go into lockdown or things may change. Have a backup plan if work is paused temporarily. Again, we talked about this before, but be realistic about the idea of, potentially going into lockdown or potentially needing to pause your work. Hopefully, as we discussed, there's the possibility you could receive furlough pay, or there's the possibility that your teaching could move online and therefore you could keep teaching even if you're in lockdown, but just have those conversations with employers. It's very much something that I think could set you in good stead. Stay in contact with your support network back home via video chat. This is something that is not exclusive to teaching abroad during a pandemic. It is something that is really important always when you are Tefling and when you are wanting to move abroad. Your family and your friends back home are your lifeline, despite all of the amazing people that you're going to meet, because you are going to meet amazing people when you're abroad. There's nothing like talking to your sister or talking to your mum or talking to your best friend, and just getting away from constant teacher talk as well sometimes is really nice. So don't feel alone, stay in contact, particularly if we go into second lockdowns and things like that. It's so important to stay connected, stay grounded with the real world, however crazy it might be right now. And finally, I just want to say it is still possible to make friends and network during a pandemic. Surprising, but true. Human beings, we still want friends and we still want to meet new people. Do it in a safe way, obviously, very important. Don't go out into the street without your mask, shouting free hugs. It's really important to follow the rules of the country that you're in, but whether that's in person, masks and all, or online, there are loads of meetup apps and things like that where you can meet expats, you can meet local people, you can do language exchanges, you can sign up for new courses, make friends with the people on those courses. I've met some really fantastic friends in the last few months of being here, some of whom I'm now locked down with, and you would never ever think that you would lock down with near enough strangers 2 months ago, but 2020 will do that to you. So yeah, it is 100% possible and likely, in fact, that you will make new friends and continue your teaching journey during a pandemic. So there we are. That is pretty much everything from me. I really appreciate all of the comments from people at the bottom saying thank you for the webinar and it's useful information. I hope it's been useful. I kind of want to talk about how it is possible to keep Tefling during this insane time. I think more than ever, Tefl is a fantastic career to get into. It doesn't, for some people it's a year, and that's great, and for some people it's a career, because there are so many things you can do with it, so many ways of kind of moving around with Tefl and really getting the most out of it. So not a day goes by that I'm, very, very grateful for the fact that I did my Tefl training with I2I. It's been great. It's absolutely changed my life. Moving to China and now to France would not have been possible without my Tefl. So very important, very passionate about it. I can see at the bottom, I2I is directing you guys to my blog. Again, it's whereistab.wordpress.com. Also my Instagram, which is attached to that, is at whereistab on Instagram. I saw a few people while we were talking following me, so that's great. If anyone has any questions, you can contact me there. You can comment on this. I2I is a fantastic resource for chatting with and for finding out more information. So I hope you enjoyed it. I may be back to talk to you guys in the future, but in the meantime, stay safe, stay well, wear your mask, wash your hands. Thank you to the people at the end saying thank you. All right, have a great evening. Bye.